First story, The Room of Silence. Mia had always heard about Diddy's mansion, but she never imagined she would be invited through its gates. Located in the heart of the Hollywood Hills, the property was more than an architectural landmark. It was a symbol of exclusivity, power, and mystery. For many, the mansion wasn't just a house, it was an entity, shrouded in legends that seemed to come to life with each party that took place there. Diddy is said to have used the mansion as a stage for more than parties. Stories circulated in industry circles about contracts signed in blood, secret alliances, and most sinister of all, unexplained disappearances. It was common to hear whispers that some of music and entertainment's brightest stars had their careers take off after a night there, while others, who had turned down something, simply disappeared. When the invitation arrived for Mia in a black envelope with gold details, she was paralyzed. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a milestone, a sign that she was on the radar of the most powerful man in the industry. The text was simple and enigmatic. You're invited to an unforgettable night at Sean Diddy Combs' mansion. Formal attire, exclusive. For Mia, a digital influencer who was building her career in fits and starts, this was more than an opportunity. It was a golden ticket to a world she was barely beginning to understand. Friends and colleagues reacted with a mixture of envy and concern. Some tried to dissuade her from going, citing the lurid stories, but Mia was stubborn. She saw this as a golden chance, a unique opportunity to expand her network of contacts and perhaps be part of that select circle. On the night of the event, the mansion seemed bigger than Mia imagined. The tall iron gates slowly opened, as if the house was swallowing the guests one by one. At the end of the long, winding stone driveway, the imposing structure stood tall against the night sky, each window illuminated by a soft light that cast intriguing shadows. Mia felt a shiver run down her spine, but it wasn't just fear. It was the magnitude of the moment, the feeling that I was about to enter a world where decisions were made and destinies sealed. Inside, the mansion was a maze of luxury. Each piece of decoration seemed to have been hand-picked, not only for its value, but for the story it carried. Persian rugs covered shiny marble floors, while paintings by renowned and some unknown artists adorned the walls. The air was scented with notes of spice, and something Mia couldn't identify, but that made her feel strangely alert. Even amid the glamour, there was something disconcerting. The other guests, producers, artists, and influencers, seemed hesitant, as if an invisible force hovered over them all. And with every step Mia took, she felt like the mansion was watching her, as if it knew she was there. Little did Mia know that this would be the night that changed everything. As Mia moved through the crowd of guests, something seemed to catch her attention beyond the soft music and hushed conversations. It was as if the mansion were alive, whispering secrets that only she could hear. Each room she explored seemed more intriguing than the last, filled with luxurious details that seemed carefully designed to delight and discomfort at the same time. It was during a conversation with a veteran producer, whose name she couldn't remember, that she first heard about the Room of Silence. The man, visibly uncomfortable, mentioned that he had never dared to go near that space. Mia noticed the tone of his voice change, a mix of reverence and fear, when he murmured, "No one goes in there, not without a special invitation. They say it's where Diddy keeps the deepest secrets, or makes the most dangerous contracts." Mia's curiosity was instantaneous. What exactly did he mean by dangerous contracts? She tried to press him for more details, but the man just shook his head, as if he had already said more than he should have. As he hurried away, Mia noticed that other guests avoided even mentioning that part of the house. It was as if the Room of Silence was a taboo, a space that existed only to be feared and ignored. Intrigued, she decided to investigate on her own. After all, his career was built on his ability to capture the unusual, the extraordinary. If there was anything else going on in that mansion, Mia wanted to know. As I walked through the halls, the atmosphere of the party began to change. The sound of music and conversation faded as she walked away from the main hall. The lights became dimmer and the air heavier. Mia had the uncomfortable feeling that she was being watched, even though she saw no one around her. She stopped in front of a hallway that seemed to stretch into infinity, with a single chandelier lighting the way. At the end of the hallway, there was a door unlike any other in the mansion. Made of dark, polished wood, it looked old, but impeccably preserved. Intricate carvings covered its surface, forming patterns that Mia couldn't identify, but that seemed to move in the dim light. There was no sign or indication of what was beyond that door, but Mia knew she had found what she was looking for. Before she could take the next step, a tall, elegant woman appeared at her side. It was one of Diddy's personal assistants, dressed in an impeccable suit, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This part of the house is not for guests, Miss Mia," the woman said, her voice low but firm. Mia hesitated, trying to appear casual. "Oh, sorry, I got lost. What's there? It feels so special." The assistant maintained her smile, but her expression hardened. "It's Mr. Combs's private space, not a place you'd want to explore." Even with the warning, Mia's curiosity grew. What was in that room that everyone seemed so determined to hide? And why did the mere act of mentioning it seem to bring palpable discomfort to anyone who listened? Upon returning to the main hall, Mia realized that there was an invisible line separating those who knew about the existence of that room from those who pretended it wasn't there. It was a secret in plain sight, but accessible only to those willing to face the consequences. Mia couldn't get the image of the carved door out of her mind. Something in that room seemed to call her, like an enigma waiting to be solved. Despite the warning from Diddy's assistant and the atmosphere of mystery that surrounded the place, curiosity grew every second. Mia knew she was playing with the unknown, but the idea of discovering something unique, something no one else would have the courage to face, was irresistible. As the party atmosphere enveloped her again, she began to come up with a plan. She needed a moment when no one was paying attention, a moment of distraction that would allow her to explore that forbidden corridor. His eyes swept the main room, where Diddy, like an invisible conductor, commanded everyone's attention. It was evident that his presence dominated the space, but even he could not be everywhere at once. The opportunity came when Diddy took the stage to give a speech. He thanked guests, praised rising stars, and shared anecdotes about his journey in the industry. The room was filled with laughter and applause, and all eyes were on him. Taking advantage of the moment, Mia slipped towards the corridor where the door to the room of silence awaited her. The path seemed longer now, as if the mansion was trying to test her. The air grew thicker and the silence deeper with each step. When Mia finally reached the door, she hesitated for a moment. His hand hovered over the intricate carving of the wood, feeling a strange vibration, as if something within the room was alive and waiting. She tried the handle, but as expected, it was locked. For a brief moment, he considered retreating. Perhaps the warnings had some basis, but instead, Mia remembered her determination to excel, how she had gotten here by defying norms and exploring the unknown. With a glance around to make sure no one was following her, she removed a small hairpin and began manipulating the lock. Her fingers were shaking, but the adrenaline kept her focused. After a few moments that seemed like an eternity, a soft click sounded, and the door opened with a low creak. Mia pushed the door open slowly, and what she found on the other side took her breath away. The room was dark, lit only by a faint light that seemed to emanate from the walls. It was smaller than she expected, but the atmosphere was suffocating, as if the air carried centuries of secrets. In the center, a pedestal held an old leather notebook, its pages open and covered with writing that Mia couldn't identify. There were symbols engraved on the walls, and, on the floor, marks that seemed to be from some type of ritual. The most disturbing thing, however, was the absolute silence. There was no sound, not the distant music of the party, not the sound of his own footsteps. It was as if the room existed in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. Mia approached the notebook, feeling a shiver run down her spine. As his eyes ran over the words, something seemed to shift in the room. The shadows on the walls lengthened, and the air grew even heavier. It was then that she heard it, a low whisper, almost imperceptible, but filled with urgency. "You shouldn't be here." She spun around quickly, but there was no one in the room. Just the continuous sound of whispers, now louder and closer. With her heart racing, Mia knew she needed to leave, but before she could move, she felt a presence behind her. "Mia!" The voice was unmistakable. She turned around and found Diddy standing in the doorway, his expression impenetrable. For a moment, he just looked at her, and silence reigned in the room again. "You don't understand what you did, do you?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with something Mia couldn't identify, disappointment or perhaps threat. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. All she could do was stare at him as the reality of her decision began to unfold before her eyes. Diddy entered the room slowly, closing the door behind him with a movement that seemed to seal something more than just the entrance. The silence that filled the room became even more oppressive. Mia felt her body freeze as he approached, his footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor like a hammer hitting her consciousness. For a moment he didn't say anything, just looked at her, and Mia had the feeling that he wasn't simply assessing her presence. He was seeing right through her, as if reading her deepest thoughts and fears. His expression was an enigmatic mix of disappointment and something else, something almost predatory. "Do you know where it is?" Diddy asked finally, his voice low but carrying a weight that seemed to reverberate off the walls. Mia tried to respond, but her throat felt dry. She shook her head slowly, unable to form words. Diddy looked at the notebook on the stand, his fingers skimming over the old pages but not touching them. "This room is older than this house, older than anyone here can understand." He turned to her, his eyes darkening. "It's a space where choices are made, where ambition meets sacrifice." The sound of his voice seemed to mix with the whispers that still surrounded the room, as if he were part of the very structure of that place. Mia instinctively took a step back, but there was nowhere to run. The door behind him seemed to disappear into the shadows. "Do you think you got here by chance?" he continued, his voice now sounding almost fatherly. "I watch every person who enters this house. I choose each one carefully. But you..." He paused, tilting his head. "You made a decision you shouldn't have made." Mia finally found her voice, even though she was shaking. I was just curious. I heard about this room and I wanted to understand." "Curiosity is dangerous," Diddy said, a faint smile curving his lips, but his eyes remained dark. "Do you think success is built solely on hard work, talent, or luck?" "No, Mia. True success comes from choices, and choices have consequences." He gestured to the notebook on the pedestal. "Do you know what is written there? Stories. Stories from everyone who has been in this room before you. Some made great choices and paid a small price. Others paid more than they were prepared for." Mia swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the notebook. The pages now seemed to move on their own, as if they were alive. She felt an urge to come closer, to see her own name written there, but something inside her stopped her. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Diddy leaned in slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because you have potential, more than most. But potential, Mia, is a double-edged sword. It can take you to the top or destroy you completely. I'm here to give you a choice." He raised a hand, and suddenly the room seemed to change. The shadows on the walls began to move, forming images of Mia in different versions of her life. In one, she was a world-famous star, surrounded by fans and fortune. In another, she was alone, forgotten and helpless. Others showed versions of her that seemed unrecognizable, broken or shrouded in something dark and frightening. "Choose the right path," Diddy said, his voice low and intense. "But know this, every choice has a price. Do you want the glory? Do you want everything the world can offer you? Or do you want to leave now, with your soul intact, but never have another opportunity like this again?" Mia felt the weight of his words, like a crushing wall. She looked at the notebook, at the shadows, and finally at Diddy. The air was so thick that breathing seemed an impossible task. "But how can I know what is right?" she asked, desperate. He smiled slightly, but the smile didn't bring comfort. "That's the beauty of it, Mia. You never know, until it's too late." Mia looked at the notebook on the pedestal. The words etched into the pages seemed to change before her eyes, rearranging themselves into sentences that somehow seemed to speak directly to her. Each line whispered promises and warnings in equal measure, but there was no clarity. The weight of the decision seemed to grow by the second, crushing her with an urgency that was impossible to ignore. Diddy remained motionless, watching her with an unreadable gaze. He didn't pressure her, didn't need it. The environment did that for him. The shadows continued to move on the walls, showing more glimpses of possible futures. In one, Mia was being awarded on a stage, her hands holding a shiny trophy as the audience gave her a standing ovation. In another, she sat alone in an empty room, surrounded by piles of bills and no light other than that leaking through the window. She looked away from the visions and back to Diddy. "What if I refuse? What happens if I leave this room now?" He tilted his head, as if considering the question. "If you leave now, you will remain the same person who entered this mansion. Nothing will change, for better or for worse. But know this, opportunities like this don't come around twice." "What if I accept?" Mia asked, her voice low, almost fearing the answer. Diddy gave a small smile, but his eyes remained dark. "If you accept, you will have everything you ever dreamed of. Fame, power, influence, but not without a cost. Every choice has a price, Mia. Some pay with sacrifices they can bear, others are not so lucky." She knew he wasn't just talking about hard work or sleepless nights. The price he mentioned was something deeper, more essential, something she might never get back. Slowly she took a step towards the notebook. Her hands shook as she reached for him. The pages, now static, showed a contract. There was no pen in sight, but the text seemed to pulse as if waiting for his decision. At the bottom, where there would normally be a signature line, there was just a single word: choose. "How do I do that?" Mia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's simpler than you think," Diddy replied. He held out his hand, gesturing to the notebook. "All you have to do is place your hand on the page and decide. If you want fame, you will know what to do. If you want to leave, just turn your back now." Mia closed her eyes, trying to calm her mind. She remembered all the years of hard work, all the doors closed in her face, all the times she was ignored. Was this the moment she had been waiting for? Or was it the moment she feared? After a long silence, she opened her eyes, took a deep breath, and reached out her hand. When her palm touched the page, she felt a wave of heat rise up her arm, followed by a brief, but intense pain, as if something had been ripped from her. The notebook glowed for a moment, and then everything was quiet. Diddy smiled. "You made your choice, Mia. Welcome to the next level." Before she could ask what that meant, the room changed. The shadows disappeared, the walls seemed to widen, and the pedestal with the notebook disappeared. Diddy opened the door, and light from the hallway spilled into the room. Mia left hesitantly, her heart still racing. When he returned to the party, he noticed that something had changed. People who previously ignored her now looked at her with interest. Renowned producers and artists approached her, praising her for work she didn't even remember doing. Her mind was in a whirlwind, but she felt the difference. She wasn't just Mia anymore. She was someone now. In the following days, his life began to change drastically. Job offers, social media followers, invitations to exclusive events, everything she ever wanted began to materialize. But at night, when she looked in the mirror, she noticed something different. His eyes seemed darker, as if they carried a weight she couldn't identify. And in the back of his mind was a constant whisper, a reminder of the price he had paid. Fame was hers, but what had she lost to get it? Second story, the Untouchables Club. Rico was at home when he received the call that would change everything. He was a rising music producer, known for mixing rhythms that no one dared to match and turning simple beats into instant hits. But despite his talent and growing respect in the industry, he still felt trapped in the shadow of the big names. The call came from an unknown number, and Rico almost didn't answer. When he finally decided to pick up the phone, a calm and authoritative voice sounded on the other end. "Mr. Rich, congratulations. You have been selected for an exclusive meeting with Sean Combs." Rico froze. The name needed no introduction. Sean "Diddy" Combs was a living legend, not just a businessman and artist, but an architect of what music and culture had become. Working with him was more than a dream. It was a seal of approval that guaranteed absolute success. "Where and when?" Rico asked, trying not to sound too desperate. The voice gave short instructions, an address in the city center, in an old, unmarked building at 10 p.m. that night. There were no further explanations, just the assurance that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Before he could ask anything, the line went dead. Upon arriving at the indicated location, Rico found something that seemed completely out of what he expected. The building was inconspicuous, almost abandoned, with dark windows and a single light flickering over the entrance. He hesitated, but the promise of a chance to work with Diddy was irresistible. Upon pushing open the heavy door, he was greeted by a man in a black suit who simply said, "Welcome to the club." The inside was completely different from the outside. Instead of worn walls and dusty floors, there was a luxurious ambiance, with low lights, leather furniture, and a soothing soundtrack that seemed designed to calm the nerves. The people in the room were the most powerful figures in the industry. Faces Rico knew only from magazine covers and talk show interviews. They spoke in low tones, laughed discreetly, and seemed completely at ease. However, something was wrong. The atmosphere, although friendly on the surface, had an underlying tension. It was as if everyone there knew something that Rico didn't yet understand. Suddenly, the conversation stopped. Everyone looked towards a back entrance, where an imposing figure appeared, Sean Combs. He was dressed impeccably, his presence commanding the room with an almost supernatural ease. "Rico," Diddy said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Welcome. We are very interested in what you can offer." Rico's world seemed to spin in slow motion. He had arrived at the place where decisions were made, but he had no idea what really awaited him. Rico felt the weight of dozens of stares as he followed Diddy to the center of the room. The environment seemed to transform as he walked, as if the energy itself changed around him. Conversations stopped completely, and the silence was so thick that even their footsteps sounded louder than they should have. He realized he was being evaluated, not just by Diddy, but by everyone present. A kind of silent test he didn't know how to pass. Diddy stopped in front of a solid glass table where two crystal glasses sparkled in the soft light of the room. He gestured for Rico to sit down. When Rico complied, Diddy kept his gaze fixed on him, as if he wanted to probe his soul. "You know what it means to be here, don't you?" Diddy asked, his voice calm, but carrying a tone that mixed authority and mystery. Rico hesitated. "It means I have talent, that you see something in me." Diddy chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That's what you want to believe. But what it really means is that you are willing to do whatever it takes. Many have talent, Rico. Few have the courage." Before Rico could respond, a waiter appeared silently beside them, placing a bottle of rare whiskey on the table. Diddy poured both glasses with precise, almost ceremonial movements before continuing. "Do you think it's an accident that some people dominate this industry? That certain names never leave the charts, while others disappear like dust in the wind?" He leaned forward, eyes fixed on Rico. "It's no coincidence. It's power. And power is not given, Rico. He is taken." Rico tried to maintain his composure, but he felt the weight of those words. He knew the entertainment world was cutthroat, but the implications of Diddy's conversation went beyond anything he had ever imagined. Before he could speak, Diddy continued. "You see," he said, pointing with the glass at the other guests in the room, "everyone here understood that early. They understood that success requires more than hard work or talent. It requires sacrifices. It requires you to be willing to give up parts of yourself." Rico looked around. People were laughing and talking to each other again, but there was something in their gaze, in their posture, that seemed empty. He began to realize that despite the wealth and fame that everyone there seemed to possess, there was a shadow that hung over them. Diddy watched Rico's reactions with interest. "You're here because you have something special, Rico. You know how to create. You know how to turn an idea into something that can reach millions. But what I'm offering you is something bigger. I'm offering you a place in this circle." Rico tried to speak, but Diddy raised his hand, cutting him off. "Before you answer, I want you to understand something. This circle is not like the rest of the world. Here, there are no limits to what you can achieve. But as I said before, power has a price." Diddy stood up and with a gesture indicated for Rico to follow him. They walked to a door at the back of the room, and the waiter quietly opened the door. Inside, there was another room, much smaller, lit only by a soft light emanating from a central table. On the table, there was a contract. Rico approached hesitantly and read the first few lines. The text appeared to be a professional agreement, but there was something strange about it. The words seemed to flow and change as he tried to fix his eyes as if they were alive. "This is just a formality," Diddy said, with an almost reassuring smile. "You sign this, and I guarantee you will have the world at your feet. Your music will dominate the charts. Your name will be remembered for generations. Everything you ever wanted will be within your reach." Rico felt a knot form in his stomach. He looked at Diddy, then at the contract, and finally at the surrounding room. He knew he was being tested, but he wasn't sure he wanted to know what the real test was. "What if I don't sign?" he asked, trying to sound confident. Diddy shrugged, but his eyes didn't stop shining with something dangerous. "Then you walk out that door and go back to your normal life. It's still good, but never extraordinary, never part of this circle, and eventually it will be forgotten." The weight of the choice hung over Rico like a heavy cloud, but he knew the decision wasn't as simple as Diddy made it seem. Rico stood at the table, the contract in front of him seeming to pulse with an energy of its own. The words written on the paper, although formally worded, seemed to move, almost as if they wanted to draw your attention to the darker clauses. He knew it wasn't a simple professional agreement. The weight of the decision was permeated in the room, in Diddy's voice, and in the silence of the other guests. Diddy stepped forward, placing a hand on Rico's shoulder, a gesture that felt simultaneously reassuring and controlling. "This contract," he began, his voice smooth and firm, "isn't just about work, it's about access, about becoming part of something bigger than you could imagine." Rico swallowed hard, trying to absorb the words as the weight of the moment seemed to crush him. "But what exactly am I signing?" he asked, trying to remain calm, even though his voice betrayed his uneasiness. Diddy smiled, but his eyes remained fixed, as if testing Rico's resistance. "You are signing your entry into the true circle of power. This isn't just about your music or your career. This is about legacy, about controlling your narrative and making sure no one else controls it. It's about being untouchable." He gestured toward the contract, but like any great opportunity, it comes at a cost. You'll have to give up something you might not even realize you already have. The question is, are you willing to pay that price? Rico frowned. "What if I want to know exactly what I'm missing?" Diddy laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Ah, boy, if I had to explain, you wouldn't understand. What I can tell you is this. What you gain outweighs what you lose, but you need to trust the process. Trust me." Diddy stood back and gestured to the shadows that filled the room. The next moment, images began to appear on the walls, like projections of a future that Rico had never imagined. He saw his name on bright signs, magazine covers, huge arenas filled with thousands of fans screaming for him. He saw world-renowned artists praising his work and offering partnerships. He saw multi-million-dollar contracts being signed with a satisfied smile on his face. "This could be yours," Diddy said, his voice echoing in the room. "All of it, but only if you are brave enough to take the next step." The images have changed. Now, Rico saw another version of himself, sitting alone in a small studio with stacks of bills and bills piled up around him. He looked exhausted, discouraged. This vision of the future was a stark reminder of what could happen if he rejected the offer. "You can continue as you are," Diddy continued, crossing his arms and leaning back slightly. "Fighting to be recognized, surviving in the middle of an ocean of competitors. Or you could be among the untouchables, where no one can touch your career, your music, your influence." Rico felt his breathing quicken. The idea of having everything he ever dreamed of was so close, but doubt consumed him. He knew Diddy wasn't someone who offered something without expecting something in return. But at the same time, he knew that opportunities like this didn't come along every day. "What happens if I accept?" he asked finally. Diddy smiled again, but this time there was something darker in his expression. "If you accept it, your life will change forever. You will have access to resources, connections, and power that few can even imagine. But you will also be linked to me. Your career will be ours. Your loyalty will be unwavering." Rico hesitated, looking at the contract again. He knew he was on the verge of a choice that could define the rest of his life. "All you have to do is sign," Diddy said, handing him a gold pen, "and it will all be yours." Rico held the pen, feeling its weight. The paint seemed thicker, darker, almost like blood. The silence in the room was absolute, and all eyes were on him, waiting for his decision. Rico held the pen, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. The walls of the room, once just a backdrop for the contract and Diddy's words, now seemed to close in around him. He looked at the contract once more, trying to ignore the feeling that words on paper were alive, pulsing with an energy he did not understand. The air in the room became denser, almost suffocating, while all looks remained fixed on it. "What if I need time to think?" Rico asked, his hesitant voice. Diddy leaned his head, studying him as a predator who evaluates his prey. "Time. No time, Rich. Decisions that really change your life are made at the moment. Now you are at the turnaround point. What you choose here will define who you will be forever." Diddy's words hovered in the air like a sentence. Rico felt a shiver traveling his spine, and without thinking, put the pen on the table. I don't know if I'm ready." A heavy silence took over the room. The guests who once laughed and talked now seemed to be still, as if they were sculpted figures in space. Diddy's smile slowly disappeared, replaced by a serious and enigmatic expression. He did not seem angry, but also showed no compassion. "Okay or not, Rich, you're already here," Diddy said, with a tone that looked like a mixture of threat and incentive. "Do you think you can go out without understanding what is really at stake?" Before Rico could answer, Diddy snapped his fingers, and the room around began to change. The soft lights declined until almost disappeared, and a new lighting, red and pulsating, took its place. The shadows on the walls began to move, forming figures that seemed to dance and squirm in impossible ways. A low and resonant vibration filled the space, like a sound coming from somewhere far away. The table with the contract disappeared, replaced by a dark stone platform that seemed to emerge from the ground. About it were recorded symbols, shining with the same red light. Rico took a step back, but the door where he had entered was no longer there. He was trapped. "Welcome to the club's heart," Diddy said, his voice echoing in the room. "This is the place where power is generated, where true decisions are made. Did you want to know what you were signing? Here is the truth." Rico looked around, his breathing getting irregular. He saw the other guests now standing in silence, as if they were passive spectators of a ritual. His expression showed no fear, but a strange acceptance, as if they had gone through it before. "You didn't think it was just a contract, did you think?" Diddy continued, his tone slightly ironic. "Nothing at this level is simple. This club is more than business, Rich. It is an alliance, a pact." The platform began to emit a stronger light, and a severe sound echoed through the room, like a drum beating a cadenced rhythm. Rico felt the ground vibrate under his feet and realized that he was not just witnessing something, he was the center of the ritual. "Now you understand the price," Diddy said, taking a step ahead. "Do you want fame, power, control? This comes with a sacrifice. It's not just money or effort, it's something bigger." Rico tried to speak, but his voice seemed stuck. He wanted to ask what the sacrifice was, but something at the bottom of his mind already knew the answer. The surrounding environment seemed alive, throbbing with an energy that was not of this world. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows behind the platform. It was tall, indistinct, with eyes shining like embers and a shape that seemed to change constantly. The figure extended a hand toward Rico, as if asking for something. He felt an intense cold cross his body, a feeling that something was being torn from inside him, even without his consent. Diddy turned to him, smiling again. "Do you want to be big, Rich? So prove. Prove that you are willing to give what is needed." Rico was paralyzed. The figure before him was unlike anything he had ever seen, a living, pulsating shadow that seemed made of smoke and fire. His eyes, two embers who burned incessantly, seemed to look straight at his soul. The extended hand was not just a gesture, but a silent command. Everything in the environment conspired to press him to make his choice, and the weight of this choice was almost unbearable. He looked at Diddy, looking for some kind of guidance, but the tycoon was impassive, almost indifferent. Diddy was leaning against the side of the platform, watching like a simple viewer. However, his eyes shone with a calculated interest. "The time has come, Rich," Diddy said, his calm but inescapable voice. "You know what is at stake. You can have everything you always wanted, or you can get out of here now, empty. But I'll tell you something. No one who chooses to come out never be the same. The world there. It was not forgiving who refuses power." The severe sound that filled the environment was more intense, as if the surrounding space itself was pulsing. Rico felt that he was in a crossroads that transcended everything he knew: career, ambition, even reality. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to order his thoughts. He remembered every time he was ignored, all the doors that closed in his face, and the relentless desire to prove himself in the world, that he was more than just another producer trying to survive. That was your chance, but at what cost? When he opened his eyes, he realized that the dark figure was closer, his still extended hand. Rico felt a shiver through his spine. He knew what the figure wanted, even if no one had said. It was not money, no hard work. It was something deeper, something essential. "If I accept, what happens to me?" Rico asked, his voice shaking. Diddy smiled but did not respond immediately. He shrugged as if the answer were obvious. "You will have the world, Rich. But what you sacrifice depends on how you deal with power. Some lose your souls. Others just find out who they really are." Diddy's words echoed in Rico's mind. He looked back at the figure, feeling a mixture of fear and curiosity. Maybe that was exactly what he wanted. Perhaps the sacrifice was necessary to achieve something truly large. "I accept," Rich finally said, his low but firm voice. At the moment the words came out of his mouth, the figure reached out his other hand and touched the rich chest. A wave of cold crossed his body, followed by an intense pain that made him fall to his knees. He felt like something was being torn from inside him, something he could never recover. The shadows in the room seemed to close around, and the severe sound reached its climax. First of all, suddenly ceased. Rico opened his eyes, panting. The room was silent and normal again. Diddy was before him, offering his hand to help him get up. He seemed pleased, as if he knew the result all the time. "Welcome to the club, Rich," Diddy said, with a calculated smile. "Now you belong to something bigger." Rico tried to sue what had just happened, but his mind was hazy. He looked around and saw that the other guests watched him, but his expressions had changed. There was no more judgment, just a silent acceptance. He was no longer a stranger, he was one of them now. In the following days, Rico's life has changed almost instantaneously. His songs began to dominate the stops. Renowned artists began to look for him for collaborations. He became a known name with more power and influence than he ever imagined being possible. But at night, when he was alone, he felt the void that had been left. It was as if a part of himself had been removed, replaced by something he couldn't understand. And in times of absolute silence, he could hear the severe and distant sound from the ritual echoing in his mind as a constant reminder of the price he had paid. Third story, Jamal and the final ritual. Jordan never imagined that one day he would receive an invitation to work directly at Diddy's private studio. As a still emerging singer and composer, he had spent years trying to gain space in a saturated industry. His life was a constant struggle between supporting himself and keeping alive the flame of his passion for music. So when the invitation arrived, it was like a radius of hope. The studio, located in an anonymous building in the city center, had the same exclusivity aura that Jordan expected. There were no signs, just a discreet entrance guarded by security guards that seemed as impassive as the concrete around. After undergoing a series of safety checks, it was driven by a narrow corridor that ended in a heavy steel door. When Jordan entered the studio, she was breathless. The space was impressive, with state-of-the-art equipment, acoustic foam, covered walls and lighting that seemed designed to create an inspiring mood. But there was something more there, something he couldn't explain. An energy in the air, as if the place had witnessed grandiose moments, and dark. Diddy was sitting in a casual leather chair, but still radiating authority. He nodded for Jordan to approach, with a calculated smile. "You have done a good job here, Jordan," he started, "but now it's time to take the next step." Jordan's heart accelerated. Diddy praising his work was already a surreal moment, but the suggestion of a next step was what he had always dreamed. Before he could answer, Diddy got up and gestured to a door in the corner of the studio. "Before we start working, I want you to see something," he said, his calm but heavy voice. "It's something special, something few have a chance to see." Jordan hesitated, but Diddy's tone didn't seem to admit refusal. He followed the tycoon through the door, entering a short corridor that ended in another room, much smaller. When the lights came on, Jordan was surprised. In the center of the room was a mirror. It was not any mirror. Its frame was made of dark wood, carved with intricate patterns, and the glass itself seemed older than anything he had ever seen. The reflection on him was clear, but something was wrong. It was as if the mirror did not reflect only the present, but also something deeper. "This is the mirror of the future," Diddy said, his voice echoing slightly in space. "It shows not only who you are, but who you can become. Your greatest triumphs and your greatest fears." Jordan looked at the hesitant mirror. "Is that real?" he asked. Diddy smiled sideways, shrugging. "Why don't you look and find out?" Jordan stepped ahead, his breathing accelerating. When he looked in the mirror, he saw his reflection, but it wasn't exactly him. In the glass, he looked older, more confident, in expensive clothes and a winning smile. It was a version of him that seemed to have reached everything he always wanted. But as it blinked, the reflection changed. Now he was alone, in an empty room, holding a glass as tears dripped down his face. The contrast between the visions made him uneasy. Is that what will happen to me?" Jordan asked, turning to Diddy. "This is what can happen," Diddy replied, crossing his arms. "The mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't make promises either. The future depends on your choices, and I'm here to help you make the right choices." Jordan could not look away from the mirror. It was as if he was stuck, mesmerized by the images that danced before him. The reflex seemed to come to gain a life of its own, alternating between scenarios of absolute triumph and devastating fall. He saw versions of himself he had never imagined. In one of them, he was on a giant stage, surrounded by thousands of fans shouting his name. In another, he was on his knees, alone in a dark alley, with his hands dirty with blood, that of someone or his own he didn't know. "Why is he showing me that?" Jordan asked, his trembling voice. Diddy remained calm, observing Jordan's reaction. "The mirror doesn't show you what you want to see, Jordan. It shows you who you can be, but it only reflects what is inside you. That's why few have the courage to look deeply." Jordan walked away a little, running his hand over his face, as if he tried to get rid of a nightmare. "This is crazy. How is something possible?" "You're looking at your potential," Diddy replied, approaching. "Your light and your shadow. Every artist has it. Talent takes you to some extent, but what defines who you really are? It's the choices you make." Suddenly, the mirror changed again, this time more intensely. He showed Jordan in a studio, working tirelessly while bright songs took shape. Then the image changed to something more disturbing. He was in a luxurious office, signing contracts while a group of people applauded him. But there was something wrong. His eyes on the reflection were empty, and he seemed distant, as if success had cost something he could never recover. Jordan stepped back, feeling the cold of the floor under his feet. What does that mean? What am I going to lose? Diddy laughed, but without humor. It means that success always has a price. The question is, are you willing to pay? The mirror began to project another image. Jordan was in a dark room, his face full of tension. He was facing the same mirror, but this time his hand was on the glass, as if trying to reach something on the other side. In the reflection, something seemed to pull him, and he struggled to resist. This part, it depends on you, Diddy continued, his voice low and full of gravity. You are on the brink of something big, Jordan, but the greatness comes with sacrifices. Some lose their souls, others find who they really are. What will it be? Jordan felt Diddy's words infiltrated his mind. The mirror was not just a tool to predict the future, it was a challenge. He knew that what he was seeing was not inevitable, but it was possible. And somehow he felt that he was being tested, that his reaction to those images would determine the next step. What do you want from me? Jordan asked, turning to Diddy. Diddy smiled but did not respond immediately. He gestured toward the mirror. The question is not what I want. The question is, what do you want, Jordan? And what are you willing to do to achieve? Jordan looked back at the mirror. This time he saw something different, a path opening before him, hazy and indistinct. He knew that if he gave a step ahead, there was no guarantees back. But the possibility of achieving everything I always wanted was there, temptingly close. Jordan stood before the mirror, feeling the weight of his choices like never before. The reflection on the glass now showed something unsettling. He himself, standing in the same place, but with a completely different expression. In the reflection, his face was hard, determined, almost cruel. It was as if he was seeing a version of himself that had already done what needed to be done and paid the price for it. How do I do that? Jordan asked, almost in a whisper. He didn't know exactly what he was asking, but he felt he was already too involved to retreat. Diddy stepped forward, his calm smile never faltering. You are already on the way, Jordan. There is no coming back. All you need to do now is accept. Jordan frowned. Accept what? Diddy gestured to the mirror, and the reflection began to change again. This time he saw a contract floating in the air inside the glass, with golden and bright letters that seemed to be pulsed with his own energy. It was the same contract that Rico had seen in his history, a pact that seemed to be more than just a professional agreement. This contract represents his commitment, Diddy explained, his voice echoing in the room. It is a guarantee that you will reach everything you always wanted, but as in any business, there are terms, and there is a price. Jordan hesitated. He slowly approached the mirror, feeling the air around him colder. He could see the words of the contract clearly, but each time he tried to read a specific clause, it seemed to be disposed of before his eyes, making it impossible to understand the details. This made him shudder. What exactly am I delivering? Jordan asked, turning to Diddy. Diddy stared at him for a moment, so he answered with a disturbing calm. You are delivering your part that you no longer need, the part that prevents you from being who you should be. The words echoed in Jordan's mind. He thought of everything he had faced so far, the closed doors, the internal doubts, the people who had betrayed him or discredited. He always told himself that he would do anything to reach the top, but now that he was facing the opportunity, the doubt eroded him. What if I don't sign? He asked. Diddy smiled, but this time there was something cold in his expression. You can leave, back to your life of battles and uncertainties. Maybe you reach the top on your own. Maybe not. But I can guarantee one thing: what you saw in the mirror, what you felt here, will never leave you. You will always know what you have lost." Jordan swallowed hard. He looked back into the mirror and saw his reflection holding the pen. It was as if the mirror was telling him that the decision had already been made. All that was missing was the final gesture. He turned to Diddy, his tremendous voice. "Why do you do this? Why me?" Diddy laughed softly, but there was something unfathomable in his tone. "Because you have something few have, Jordan. You have fire. You have ambition. I'm just showing you how to use them. The rest, it's with you." Jordan knew he could no longer hesitate. He reached into the mirror, and as soon as his fingers touched the glass, he felt intense heat cross his body. The pain came shortly thereafter, as if something was being torn from inside him. He tried to pull his hand back, but it was too late. The mirror held him, and he felt his essence change. When the contract disappeared from the glass, Jordan fell to his knees, panting. He looked at his hands, hoping to see something different, but they were the same. However, he knew something inside him had changed. Diddy watched him, pleased. "Congratulations, Jordan. You just secured your place at the top." In the following days, Jordan's life has changed almost surreal. What once looked like a slow and uncertain climb became a meteoric explosion. He received invitations to collaborate with the biggest names in the industry. His songs climbed to the top of the charts almost instantly, and his presence on social networks grew exponentially. In a few weeks, Jordan was no longer an unknown artist to becoming a name that everyone commented on. He should be happy. He had everything he always wanted: fame, wealth, influence. But there was something he couldn't ignore, a persistent feeling of emptiness. It was as if, along with his rise, an essential part of himself had disappeared. At first, he attributed this to the stress of sudden fame. The tours, the interviews, the incessant commitments demanded more from him than he expected. However, at night, when he was alone in his luxurious apartment, he felt something deeper, a disconnection. He looked in the mirror and saw his reflection, but it was as if the person on the other side wasn't real. One night, while reviewing contracts with his agent, Jordan began to realize something strange. Diddy's name was associated with all his agreements, directly or indirectly. Each collaboration, each project seemed to somehow to go through his hands. It was as if his career was completely intertwined with Diddy's influence, more than he had realized at the beginning. He tried to ignore it, but the restlessness grew. It was during an album release party, months after the pact, that he had his first experience really disturbing. In the middle of the celebration, Jordan moved away from the crowd and entered a room to breathe. There he found an old mirror, similar to what he had seen in Diddy's studio. When he looked at the reflection, he saw something that froze it. It was not just his normal reflection. He was himself, but with dark eyes, like wells without background. His expression was rigid, and he seemed exhausted, consumed. And then the reflection smiled, a smile Jordan had not made. "You chose this," said the reflection, his low voice full of malice. "You wanted everything, and now you have it. But was it worth it?" Jordan backed away, stumbled into a chair, but when he blinked, the mirror returned to normal. He tried to convince himself that it was just stress speaking, but the voice of the reflex kept echoing in his mind. In the following months, Jordan began to realize the actual costs of what he had done. He had fame, but his relationships became superficial. Friends and family seemed distant, as if something in it moved them away. His creativity, once an uncontrollable force, now seemed directed by something external. He made music he sold, but he felt no connection with anything he created. Worse yet, he started to have recurring nightmares with the mirror. In dreams, he was pulled into the glass by his own reflection, where he was trapped in an empty and endless space, surrounded by whispers of voices that seemed to mock him. He woke up sweaty, panting, but fear persisted even after awakening. He tried to confront Diddy, but each attempt to set up a meeting seemed to be diverted. When he finally managed to find him during an exclusive event, Jordan gathered the courage to speak. "What did you do to me?" he asked, his voice loaded with frustration and fear. Diddy, always calm, just smiled. "I didn't do anything to you, Jordan. You did it to yourself. All I did was give you the tools. The rest was your choice." Jordan wanted to argue, but he knew that deep down, Diddy was right. He had made the decision. He had extended his hand to the mirror and accepted the pact. But that did not make the weight of the consequences easier to support. Jordan began to realize that the mirror was more than an object. It was a symbol, a direct connection with the pact he had made. He saw the mirror in his nightmares, but eventually he began to notice his presence at random times of wakefulness. Common mirrors seemed to reflect more than they should. They not only showed their physical appearance, they exposed something deeper, something he didn't want to face. On a particularly difficult night, after a show sold out in a gigantic arena, Jordan returned to his dressing room and found an identical mirror to what he had seen in Diddy's studio. He had no idea how that object had arrived there, but he knew it was no coincidence. Reluctant, he approached. The mirror was quiet like any other, but Jordan knew it was enough for him to reveal his truth. He tried to look away, but, like a magnet, the mirror attracted him. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice low and almost broken. The moment he spoke, the reflection began to change. He saw his triumphant version again, the Jordan that dominated the industry, surrounded by riches and admirers. But this time, something was different. In the background, he saw dark, almost invisible figures hovering around him as spectra. When Jordan in the reflection turned to face him, his eyes were empty, and his skin seemed pale, as if something was draining his life slowly. "What do you want from me?" Jordan asked, his voice full of despair. The answer did not come in words, but in images. The reflection showed the moment he touched the mirror in Diddy's studio, signing the pact. He showed how his choice since then had been guided by that decision, and then the reflex changed again, showing a dark and endless road. At the end of her, Jordan saw himself sitting alone, holding his head with his hands as the surrounding world was still without him. "You made your choice, Jordan," the reflection finally said, his voice a distorted echo. "And choices cannot be undone. The mirror never forgets." Jordan backed away, trying to escape from that vision, but when he tried to leave the room, he realized that the door had disappeared. He was trapped. The only way out seemed to be through the mirror. Desperate, he shouted, "I want to get out of it. I want my life back." The reflection laughed, an empty and cruel sound. "Your life has never been yours. You handed it. Now you belong to us." At the same time, the mirror began to shine with an intense red light. Jordan felt like the floor was disappearing under his feet. He fell to his knees, his hands covering his eyes as the room around him seemed to dissolve. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the dressing room, as if nothing had happened. But he knew something had changed. He looked into the mirror on the wall, now a simple, ordinary mirror, and realized that he could never completely escape what he had done. In the following months, Jordan continued to rise in the music world. His name became synonymous with success, and his influence grew like never before. But behind the scenes, he lived tormented. Each mirror that see seemed to whisper, each shadow seemed to observe it. He knew that his fame and fortune had a price, and that he was still paying. With each new achievement, he wondered the more he could bear before the mirror came back to charge the final part of the agreement.